Welcome to another session of the Learner's Mindset Discussion. I'm Dr. Dwayne Harapnik, and
I'm Dr. Talissa Thibodeau.
today we are going to be exploring the topic of voice, student voice. This is an extremely important aspect of the CSLE plus COVA framework in the sense that finding student voice or helping students to find their voice is something that is quite challenging. And due to the systemic environment that we have, where we really don't give a lot of our students the opportunity to find their voice over primary and secondary education, and even in their post-secondary education, students are challenged when they're given that opportunity. And this is something that we've noticed within our courses within the DL program. So this is a timely discussion because we work at helping students to develop their voice. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that you're right, Dr. H, that folks have a hard time understanding and realizing that their voice is important. Everyone has a different voice and something different to share. Your experiences are not the same as mine. And we learn from each other, and that's how we network and we start to develop and build our voice. But our students do, and I'm not just speaking of our DLL students, but even our younger students are sort of ushered into this model of, raise your hand, give me the right answer, as opposed to expressing what's important to them, what kinds of connections they're making. And I want to be able to bolster that and encourage that in our program so that we can kind of change that mindset in schools. I've been in the schools and seen this happen, as a classroom teacher. There were times where we had to get through the content, and I think we need to shift away from that, so that our learners can feel important, they can have the voice they need to have, and then we can prepare them for life, so that they know that what they say is important. That's important to me. What about you?
Yeah, I think we definitely do have a challenge with that. I know in working with a lot of our digital learning and leading students that getting them over that hump of recognizing that they often are much more knowledgeable than many of their colleagues are in a particular area. They often have much more experience. They would probably fall into that top 5% of a group of people who have a certain skill and ability, and what they know is quite significant, and yet they don't believe that. And it's only after a lot of encouragement, a lot of opportunity, a lot of patience on our part in terms of providing the opportunity and the context to bring that voice out of them, where they start to realize that they really can make a difference and make a contribution. And there's probably nothing more exciting, I shouldn't say nothing, well, there's many things exciting when I'm watching our discussion formats or forums in the program, but when I watch students, in the discussions go back and forth and they recognize, hey, I can actually do this. Hey, I really do know what I'm talking about. I'm going to be able to implement this change. I really know how this can potentially work. And once they recognize that they really are prepared, they've done the literature review, they've explored the ideas, they've read all the books, they really are equipped and prepared. And once they start talking amongst each other in the discussion forums, they start to recognize that they really do have the skills and ability to make those changes, to implement that strategy, to implement that innovation, or to lead their organization in a certain way. And so I think it's really a matter of giving students time to find their voice, and then once they start to find it, to encourage them to keep on going down that path. And it's so important that we do that. Um, uh, I I keep on going back to somebody like Mizero or Bandura. Mizero makes the argument that if you don't actually give your learner an opportunity to orally state things, reflect things, or to even write about it, he argues that true transformative learning, deeper learning really doesn't happen. Albert Bandura, the psychologist out of Berkeley, makes a similar argument, slightly different in the sense that he points to self-efficacy, the opportunity that we give people, or when people take advantage of the opportunity to voice their opinion, to write about it, to make that blog post, to write it in that essay, but more importantly, put it in a place like that, like students' e-portfolios or the blog post, where it is going to be seen by others. And that process of making those ideas visible and then having other people engage and ask questions, when it goes through that process, a person's self-efficacy develops because they hear themselves, they read themselves, and in the exchange, you have people who are affirming them or even asking questions, and they're able to defend those questions. So that whole process of putting those thoughts down, either orally or written or in a podcast, whatever the case may be, that is part of transformative learning. And I don't think we do that enough. And what we're seeing in our program is we know we don't do that enough in K-12, because a lot of people come into university and they're not really prepared to do much more than saying, is this going to be on the test, or to regurgitate information on an essay. So I think we have a bit of work to do systemically to encourage voice, and yet the literature talks about voice everywhere.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I think about several things when you were talking. First, reflection. I don't know that people are always, especially students, ready to put their ideas out there for other people to comment on and reflect. But see, when you reflect, you're revising and restructuring and thinking. You're molding your thinking. You're getting your ideas ready for the next best thing. That's what I do when I go over my own articles or my own media projects that we build constantly. I'm looking for ways to iterate, make it better. And I draw connections that I otherwise would not have drawn if I did not reflect on my experience. And I go back to Dewey. You don't learn anything just by doing it. You actually have to reflect on what you're doing as well. And so that reminds me of 5317, one of the courses that we teach in the program. The students are given an opportunity to write and express their voice on a topic area that's important to them. And a lot of folks will choose topics that in the beginning they feel a little bit of discomfort with. And I say, well, why would you pick something that you don't know something a lot about? And they'll say, well, I thought that's what you wanted me to do, or that was something that I could write about. And I said, well, maybe you should consider what you're doing as far as your innovation plan is concerned, something authentic to you. What is authentic to you? And write about that. And a lot of times they'll come up with a really awesome article and some technology integrated project that they've worked on. I had a student who did a project where she actually, and I won't go into specifics, transformed what her city had decided in terms of, and she did this with her class, making, it was destroying a pathway for the wood, destroying a pathway for, what was it called? They were going to lay down a new road. That's what it was. And they were going to destroy all these trees. And so she and her students came up with a really awesome project. And they used social media to change the minds of the folks that were deciding on whether or not these trees were going to get knocked down. And they saved the pathway. They saved the trail. And when she switched her topic to that, her writing came alive. She's like, wow, I didn't realize how much we did, how much the students learned. Look at their comments to me. She shared this with me. She shared pictures with me. And I said, now we're going somewhere. Because initially what she had turned into me is what she thought I wanted. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted her to focus on an authentic learning experience, something that was important and relevant to her, and express her voice through that authentic learning opportunity. And that's what she did. And everything changed from there. It's like she blossomed. And I'll have that same situation happen with other students in the course. And they'll come back to me and they'll say, gosh, I never thought I could actually say something on that. I thought I had to be an expert. I'm like, no, all of our experiences are different. We learn from each other. That's how we do it. So I just thought I would share that.
I find that interesting that that particular course, just to provide a context for our viewers and listeners, is that in that course, most of our students are a minimum of 7 or 8 courses into the whole master's. And so they're more than 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the program. And it's usually after 3 or 4 courses where students start to take ownership and get comfortable, and they start to find their voice, and they'll go down a certain path. But I find it interesting that it doesn't take much for a learner to sort of fall back into that old habit well, what do I need to give the professor? What, you know, I don't know what I should be writing, so I'll pick a topic and I'll just write about that. And you had mentioned that when they finally write about something that is important to them, they blossom, and the writing changes, the voice changes, their ownership changes. The writing actually becomes quite good. It's easy to follow. It moves from a passive voice to the active voice, right?
Yes.
That, you know, they're not trying to sound like an academic, because what they're doing is sharing an amazing experience that they, you know, have been part of, and they're encouraging people to join in that experience. And so, you know, it's those authentic opportunities that you get students to reflect on and to write about that really help them to recognize that they really are experts in particular areas. And even if they aren't the world's top expert, it doesn't really matter, because if they can actually bring ideas to bear and share with others and help make a difference in other people's lives, you don't always have to be the world's foremost expert to do that. Sometimes it's a matter of just sharing another perspective, another viewpoint, another opportunity. Hey, take a look at what we did. Look how well this worked. You can do this too. And I think that's extremely important that we do that. We help students to develop that. It's not just important that we do that in our master's program for our particular students. It's important because, you know, more than half, sometimes 2/3 of our students are actually going to be in the classroom teaching. A lot of our students are in that capacity. So it's important that our master's students understand how important voice is, so that the students that they have in their classroom are given that opportunity to find voice. You know, I'm going to refer to a book once again that I had mentioned before, A More Beautiful Question. And in that particular book, you know, the authors make the argument based on, or the author makes an argument based on some of his research, you know, that you know, students stop asking questions by the time they hit middle school, and by high school, it's just questions are non-existent. And so if we encourage the asking of questions, well, then we're also encouraging ownership and voice, and the ability for the learner to really, you know, have a stake in what it is that they're doing. And those questions are so instrumental in finding that voice, because quite often it isn't until you ask a specific question, look at a particular problem, analyze it from a different orientation, that you will actually have the ability to make that difference in terms of what you're doing. And then when you talk about it and you share that, it's yours. It's your voice, your experience. And it can be that simple, and yet it can be that hard, because, you know, we've got 12 years of K to 12, or 13, depending on where you're at, of that recipe regurgitation. You know, the right answer on the exam. It's not my answer. It's the answer that you want. And so systemically, I think we are really quenching a lot of passion and voice in our learners. And what you and I are finding is that we can build it. We can get them excited. They find their voice, but it doesn't take much. If there's a little bit of doubt, well, they go back to something that's safe. Well, what did you want me to do? You tell me what you want me to give you, and I'll give you just that. And so we have to remind them, no, it's yours. It's your voice. It's your ideas. It's your experience. And you know, when they get that reminder and that encouragement, and that's something that we do in 5317, but that's something we do in all of our courses, because of the way the ePortfolio is built into the program. And that's one other thing that I think is so important about ePortfolios. It's not a digital container where you put stuff. The ePortfolio is a tool that helps the learner to find their voice. And I know for some of our students who are doing an ePortfolio initiative, once they shift the focus from digital content to the ePortfolio as this mechanism, this tool, this resource that will help students to develop their voice, it changes the way that they look at implementation. So it's a challenge to keep on reminding people, but we have no choice, because there's so much of that systemic force and effort to restrict people and restrict their thinking. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
You're right, but their creative voice can be their outlet. You know, I'm thinking back to another article that a student wrote, and she made the argument as to why her district needed a technology coach. and what all she was doing, building a STEAM classroom, lab environment, and a few of the other things she was doing. And I thought to myself, wow, you know, she really made a strong argument here. She let her voice be heard. That was so important to her. I said, you're writing your own job description. That's what you're doing. And you'll eventually get there. So when she kind of said, you mean I can really write about something like that? And I said, yes, absolutely. Use this as an opportunity to showcase and share what you have learned and impart your ideas and impact someone this way. And then go back through your writing and see what other pieces you want to add and where you want to shift it, change it, mold it. You know, that's that revising and restructuring of ideas and allowing it to come alive for you. And you know, you and I, when we do our writing, we're always trying to sort of follow a format, but you and I, we tend to deviate from that and go down our own path. And we want them to do that too. We want them to experience, you know, the freedom that they have in having a voice. It's not all about sticking to a template. It's not all about what this person wants, this professor wants, or your school district wants. What about you? Sometimes we learn, sometimes we miss that part of being able to have that freedom to learn and express ourselves. And that's what we want to give back to our learners in this program. That's what we want to give back to our kids. I think about my little ones. I want them to be able to share with me what they're thinking. And as a matter of fact, I told my husband 2 days ago that my kids were going to have an e-portfolio starting in kindergarten. They just don't I want them to start writing about their experiences and sharing it and documenting it. I can always go back and take a look at that and realize, you know, when you were little, you wanted to be a police officer, you wanted to be a teacher, and now you're growing up and look how your disposition has changed, what you've added to it. That's another thing, dispositions. Whenever we write a culminating blog posts in the last 5 weeks, the fifth week of the course, we're always asking our learners to tie their experience together and reflect on their experience in the courses. And I think what's really good about that is they can draw those connections that they didn't see 5 weeks before that. And if they're doing that every class and they can look back, wow, look what I've learned, look what I've done, they change quite significantly. Their voice changes. They actually, as they build those blog posts, they start seeing their voices change as they go. They start realizing that what they're doing is important and they have potential that they may not have realized in that first course when fear is in front of them.
Boy, you've brought up a lot of interesting things that I want to talk about. I'll just try to pick one or two because we don't want to go on too long here. Although, you know, we are getting longer and longer in these long form discussions. You mentioned something about the iterations, multiple iterations, going back and thinking and reflecting, and that process of introspection, repetition, reflection, multiple iterations, reviewing ideas and work is so foreign to a lot of students that it can be intimidating at first. But once they recognize that they're not just doing an assignment for shelfware to put it on the shelf and never look at it again, but this is something that they're going to continue to work with and to revisit and to continually improve, they start to recognize just how important it is to refine their thinking and to refine their voice. This is when you start to analyze what it is you're saying and how you're saying it, what your writing's like, and you're getting that clarity that I think is extremely important, because we use this metacognitive reflective process to get clarity, and that's part of the finding the voice process, and it's also part of developing your voice. So that iterative process, I think, is extremely important. And you also mentioned something that the learners see the change, and I would suggest that change is really just the natural growth, that happens when we revisit ideas, when we take a look at it again, we come back and we think about different things. This morning I listened to an interview, and I had an interesting experience because it ended up taking me down a bit of a bunny trail. And I'm not overly fond of postmodernist ideas, but the author, or the person who was being interviewed, had some really good substantive ideas, making a connection between postmodernism and libertarianism, and how the fact that there's many ideas, many options, these ideas were synergistic. And he pointed to the writings of Hayek and a few other people. And he said that if you actually go take a look at the primary sources, if you look at what the authors actually said, and if you take a look at their development over their life's work, you'll see how their ideas were refined and they grew and they developed, and how they, Hayek in particular really emphasized that notion of liberty and how important it was, and the fact that, when we start to restrict thinking, that we can limit people by that restriction. Anyways, where I'm going with this is that it made me rethink my thoughts on postmodernism, because I've been somewhat skeptical of it, but at the same time I was thinking, wow, this is interesting. I cracked open a few articles by Hayek and took a look at it, and it made me go, I need to revisit that. That's something I'm going to write about. That's something I'm going to explore. Well, you know what? That's what we want our learners to do. That's part of finding your voice, because if you can find your voice, you're also going to enter into that metacognitive reflective process and go, that didn't really sound right. Was I really clear on that? Or it might be, I'm sure glad that my thoughts on this idea matured a bit, because 10 years ago, I didn't sound that good in that regard. I think my thinking wasn't that clear. And so it's important that we let our learners know that this is a growth process. I'm an old guy with gray hair and I'm going, my thoughts are developing on this. You never stop growing and you never stop changing. And your voice is one way that you can continue on that growth process, because as you express yourself, as you write about these ideas, as you create videos, as you create blog posts, as you create, podcasts, you start to analyze what it is you're saying, and you start to clarify your thinking, and you grow. And that's what we want. We want our learners to grow and to be excited about the fact that, you don't have to sit there in a static state for your entire life. You can grow and develop, and the opportunities are just almost unlimited in terms of what we can do. So I think the voice component of what we do is really, we don't spend enough time talking about it, and I don't think we really recognize just how powerful it is. And people like Mizero, again, he talks about a lot of different things, and same with Bandura and others. And if you take a look at most of the constructivists, Dewey, Piaget also, Vygotsky, these people emphasize the voice, but yet when you mention Piaget, that's child development. You mention, Vygotsky, well, social learning and zones of proximal development. There's certain things that we categorize these people to fit into, right? Bruner, discovery learning, right? Those types of things. And yet all of these authors really talked about, voice, making those meaningful connections. And I think it's important that we encourage everybody, our learners, to recognize this is an ongoing developmental process, that if we really embrace it, it never changes, or it never ends, rather. No, it always changes, it never ends. And I think that's the important part.
I think that with authentic opportunities for people to actually grow into, that's where that voice sort of develops. But without your voice, you cannot collaborate with other people to grow. You have to have, your thoughts on something. You have to pull that together and share that out. And you may not like you said earlier, you may not like what other people have to say in return, but be open to it. Be open to listen. And hear ideas, because you never know, one day down the line when that idea is going to pop back into your head, someone else shared with you as a result of you sharing your voice. And if you had not done that, you would have missed that key idea that helped you move your own idea forward. May not apply at the time, but it will apply later. Or maybe it won't ever apply, but at least you listened and you heard it. So part of developing your voice is collaborating. And if you can't share your voice, you can't collaborate. It's pretty simple. When I think about it in that way. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful to listen, and this is just me talking here, to my students and learn their voices. I learn who they are in their posts, their discussion boards, our meetings, and I encourage our students and anyone for that matter to share and talk with us, get to know us. We care about your voice and we want to help you move your ideas forward. whatever path that may be. And I hope that you'll trust us to do that, because that's what we're here to do. So, you know, in that regard, Dr. H, I think you feel the same way. Am I right?
Oh, definitely. You mentioned another key aspect, authentic opportunities. And before we wrap up here, I want to touch on something that I was reminded of how important authentic learning opportunities are. At the ABLE conference this past summer, or late summer, I remember watching a presentation, three people involved in a collaborative project, and they were talking about a capstone course for these particular students. And one of the biggest challenges that they faced was getting students to actually take ownership and write meaningfully about their capstone, about what they were doing. And when they were talking about that, the students' biggest lament is that they were being asked to write about things that weren't important to them, that weren't meaningful to them. And I, in the audience, I'm thinking, well, if you gave the students an authentic learning opportunity that they owned, that meaning then comes to life, right? It's difficult to write in a meaningful, purposeful way if you don't have some aspect of meaning that comes out of ownership of what it is that you're learning or doing. And it was interesting to hear the lament of these e-portfolio experts, recognizing that, yeah, the reflective part, there's something missing. There's something missing. I did have the opportunity to talk to them about, authentic opportunities after, and they were intrigued by that. But then, well, how do you assess that? How do you mark that? And what about all the variables? Again, authentic learning opportunities has a whole assortment of baggage that we will address in other videos, and we have already addressed. But I think that's an extremely important part of this notion of voice. If you own it, if it's yours, it's much easier to find your voice. If you don't, then does it even really matter? That's what students ask. That's what they say, right?
And they
Interesting.
default to the academic side and start writing an academic paper. And, there's times for that. There's also times to express your voice through authentic learning opportunities, through your writing, through your posts, you know. So I think we could probably always do a better job of communicating that in our courses, just so that folks know they have a little bit of freedom there.
That is a good reminder, and you know what? Let's sort of end on that note that we've got another series of courses starting next week, helping students to find their voice and reminding them that they do have a voice and that they can make a difference. I think is just one of those ongoing things that we have to continue to do, and it never stops. I think it's part of the relationship. You want to encourage, you want to affirm people, and quite often people will need that positive affirmation and encouragement because systemically, yeah, we do a pretty good job of measuring content, and so we don't do a great job of developing voice, and so systemically the odds are stacked against us. So we have to remind students of how important this is, and remind them of how important it is for them to remind their students
Yes,
and to pay this
exactly.
forward and to pass it on. Yeah, very important. That's our voice for today, by the way. I couldn't resist.
You were planning your own, weren't you?
Yeah, I was fighting that all the way through. So, um, wonderful session. Appreciate chatting with you about this. It's always an interesting endeavor, and so looking forward to additional conversations about all the things that we're doing on a regular basis and creating significant learning environments.
All right.
Good stuff. Take care.